Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to the sixth part in this series where we're building a personal dashboard app using Angular. In this video, we're going to be focusing on implementing the route transitions that you see here. So this is a preview of what the route transitions will look like by the end of the video. Alright then, so let's go and start working on these route transitions. Let's go to the app component, the app.component.html. Okay, so the reason I'm going here is because this is where we have to set up the route transitions, because here is where the router outlet is, right? So we want to actually transition the components that are injected into this area, into this div, right? So this router outlet tag marks the spot where the routed components will be put, right? So they're actually put next to the router outlet tag. So here, right? So components goes here, right? And we can see that if we go to the inspect element here and go to the elements, and if we look at the router outlet, it's here, right? And this is the content section, and that's here. Okay, so if we look here, we have the content section, we have the router outlet, and then next to the router outlet, we have the app bookmarks. And that's because that is the route that we're at. And if we change the route to to-dos, and we go back to the inspect element, then here we see that the app bookmarks has been taken away and the app to-dos has been put here. Okay, so the component of the current route is put next to the router outlet, and that means it will be put inside this content section div, right? This div here. Okay, so we actually want to set up the Angular animations on this div. Okay, so let's get rid of this. Okay, save that, and yeah, alright, so let's now go here. Okay, and let's set up the route animation on here. So let's do @ and then the name of the trigger. So the Angular animations trigger name would go here. So let's call it route anim. Okay, and let's surround this in square brackets. And let's bind this to the return value of a method that we're going to create. And that's going to be called prepare route. Okay, so let's go and create this method in the app.component.ts. So let's go to app.component.ts and let's create that. First of all, we can actually get rid of this because this was put here by the Angular CLI for the demo application, but we don't need it, so we can get rid of that. And then here we can actually implement the method that we called here, so prepare route, and prepare route will actually take in the router outlet. So here we can actually take in outlet, and this will be of type router outlet. Okay, and if we go back to the template, we now actually have to get the router outlet and pass it in here. So the way that we can do that is we can actually create a template variable called outlet, and we do that using hashtag outlet is equal to outlet. Okay, so this will put the router outlet object in the outlet template variable. Okay, and you can actually see more on how this all works if you go here and you look at this, right? So in the docs, they kind of go over all of this, and they're going over the router outlet, and here they show how to create a template variable that will take the value of the outlet, of the router outlet. Okay, so let's now go back to our code, and here we can now save this, and we can now go back to the component class, and here what we can do is we can now and let's actually just go to the browser. Okay, and we're not seeing the underline, or this, like the selected state isn't showing. I think that's because we have errors, right? So if you inspect the element and go console, we see we have errors. Let's go here and let's save this. That should fix the errors. Let's go back here, and there we go. Cool. All right, so for now, let's just implement a very simple route transition where the old route fades out and the new route fades in. So let's go and do that. Let's go to the prepare route, and what we have to do here is we have to return a value that is then binded to the root anim here, right? The at root anim. And what this value here is it's a value that the root animation will use as the state, okay? And that's how Angular Animations knows when to animate, right? So it will animate on state change, and we can then set up state change expressions for our transitions, right? So, all right, so here we actually have to return something to tell Angular that the root has changed. So let's do return, and then here we can do outlet.activated root.url, okay? And this is an observable actually. So we should probably get the snapshot. So I think we can do activated root.snapshot. That's right. And then do .url. So that is the current snapshot of the root. So let's just see if this works. All right. Okay. So let's save that and let's go back to the application. And let's go and see the console. And here we're getting an error, and it's saying cannot read property activated root of undefined. Okay, and that's actually because if we go back to the template, we haven't passed in the outlet. So the error is saying cannot find property activated root of undefined, and that's the outlet, right? So this is undefined. That's because we aren't passing it in here. So if we pass in outlet and save that and go back to the application, we should now see if I actually go here. Yes, so the error is different. It's saying that it found the at root anim, but we haven't actually included the browser animations module. So if we go to the app.module, and if we go here, we can import the browser animations module. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go import, and then in curly brackets do browser animations module from @angular/platform browser/animations. All right. Now we can go down here to the imports and add it here, like that. Okay, so let's save that and let's close that now, and let's go back to the application and let's go to the console, and we're still getting the error, and I think that's because we actually have to go and set up the trigger for this root anim. Okay, so let's go and set up an animation that has the trigger root anim, and then that should get rid of the error. So if we go here, and if we go here and we create animations like that, okay, and now here we want to set up a trigger which has the name of root anim. Okay, and then we can set the definitions, which is an array of animation metadata. Okay, so let's save that and let's go back to the application and let's see if we get any errors. Okay, so now it's a different error. So it's saying outlet is not activated. Okay, so if we go back to the code here and we can now go here, it's saying that the outlet is not activated, and I think that's why we're getting the error here. As we can see here, it's inside the prepare root method on this line here, right? So it's saying that the outlet is not activated. So what we can do is we can go here and we can actually put an if statement. If outlet dot is activated. Okay, and then only then we can then return outlet.activated root.snapshot.url. So let's save that and let's go back to the application. Let's see if we get any errors. Let's go to the console and get no errors. Great, cool. All right, so let's close that. All right, so now we have set up the trigger, but there's no animations or anything, and that's because we haven't defined any animations or anything like that. But now this should be working so that each time we change the root, then we get a different value from the prepare root method, and that is the state, right? So then we can actually create a transition which takes in a state change expression. So if we go here, we can now do transition, and this is a method that we have to import from @angular/animations and trigger as well, right? So those have to both be imported from @angular/animations, and this transition method takes in a state change expression. Okay, so the state is what is returned from this method here, and here we can actually scroll down here, and we can see here that a state change string takes the form of state 1 to state 2, right? So this is like an arrow, right? So state 1 to state 2, okay? Where each side is a defined animation state, or an asterisk to refer to a dynamic start or end state. Alright, so this asterisk is a very useful wildcard that we can use. And that's what we're going to use. We want to actually say on any state change, do this animation. So to do that, we can do asterisk to asterisk. Okay, so this is saying whenever there's a change from one state to another state, whatever that state is, right? So these are completely dynamic states, right? So any state to any state. Then here we can type in the steps, okay? So these are the animation steps, right? Alright, so inside here, we can just play around a little bit, and let's create a style. Okay, so style is a function that is also imported from @angular/animations. So let's do that, and okay, and then inside here, we can pass an object, and here we can actually set some styles. So for example, we can do background is blue, like that, and if we go here and we set animate, and that's another function that has to be imported from @angular/animations. And if we go here and we can just type in the duration, so like 1000, so 1000 milliseconds, right? So 1 second. All right, so if we save that and go back to the application and kind of see what happens, we now see that it kind of flashed blue and faded out that blue, right? So if we go here, each time we change the root, it's styling the host component, which is, if we go here, this div is the host component of this animation as we have the @root_anim on this div, right? So this content section div is styled as blue, as having a blue background each time we change the root, and it fades out to its normal state, its regular state here, right? So it's animating for 1 second to animate back to its normal state. And that is a state of having a transparent background, right? Because if we inspect here, first of all, we can see that it's a transparent background, right? But to see properly what the computed value is if we go here, and if we make sure we select the right thing, so this div that has the content section class, if we go here to the computed styles, then we can actually go and show all. And if we show all, we can actually search for background, right? So background color, and we see here that the background color is transparent, right? So this is completely transparent, as the alpha value is 0, right? So it's actually animating to this value, right? Okay, so that's what's happening here, because we aren't passing in any styles to explicitly animate to, which we could do also. We could put here a style here, and we could actually say that we want to animate this explicitly to a different set of styles. So we could set this to violet. If we save that, go back to the application, then now it's actually animating to violet, and then it's instantly changing back to transparent, and that's because we haven't added an animate to animate to the regular state, right? So here it's just animating to this style here, and then the animation instantly ends at that point, and it doesn't actually transition nicely to the end state. So what we can do now is we can animate, and we can put in another animate here and say that this animates for 1 second, so 1000 milliseconds, and save that and go back to the application. And now it's animating from blue to violet and then to transparent. Okay, cool. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me actually get rid of this one because we don't need that. So my point here was that when we pass in just a duration into animate, then it means it's animating to the end state, right? So it's transitioning nicely to the end state. Okay, so if we go here, I think we can actually see that it's described here. So if we look here, we have the styles as the second argument, and it's optional, right? It's got that question mark, so we haven't got to specify it. All right, so here we can see that when this styles is null, so when it's not specified, then it uses the styles from the destination state, right? So the end state. This is useful when describing an animation step that will complete an animation, right? And that's what we were doing before when we wanted to complete the animation so that it transitions nicely to the end state, okay? Okay, cool. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so now we can actually see that, let's actually save this and let's go back to the application. So now we can actually see that this is working, right? We are now able to change the styles of the host component, and it's happening on each root change. Okay, cool. So yeah, so this is all happening on the host component, and the host component is this div. However, we don't actually want to animate this. We actually want to animate the root components, right? And if we go to the browser, and if we go to inspect element, and if I go here and move this down a little bit. Okay, so here, if we look what we have here, we have this div, and that's the content section div, and inside this div, we have the router outlet. And the router outlet marks the spot where Angular should inject the root components, right? And we are at /bookmarks, and that means we want to show app-bookmarks, as we defined in the routing module, right? Here, we set the path bookmarks to the bookmarks component, and that's what Angular is doing. It's actually injecting the bookmarks component where this router outlet tag is, right? And that's why we use the router outlet tag, so that we can mark the spot where the root component can be injected. And it's pretty useful to know that it's injected next to the root outlet, not inside it, right? So here we see that the root outlet is closing here, right? So this app-bookmarks isn't inside it, it's next to it. All right, so that's pretty cool to know. All right, cool. So currently we are styling this content section div each time we do the animation, right? So yeah, so that's what we're doing. And that's because we are styling the host component. However, we don't actually do that. We actually want to select the root components, right? And the root components are completely dynamic, right? Because they are injected by Angular each time we change the root. So we need to find a way to query for these injected components. So what we can do is we can actually go back to the code here, and we can go back to the component class and go back to the animation. And what we can do here is we could go up here, and we could actually use the query function, and that is going to be imported from @angular/animations. Okay, and here we can actually provide a selector. Okay, and if we actually scroll down here, we can see that it's the element query, and if we look here, we can use query enter or query leave, and that will query for newly inserted / removed elements. So query enter will query for newly inserted elements, and query leave will query for newly removed elements, right? And that's actually what we're going to be using, right? Because here we can actually use query enter to select the entering component, so the root component of the new root, and query leave can be used to select the leaving element, so that would be the old root component. So the root component of the root that we had before we changed to the new root. All right, cool. So let's go here and let's query for the entering, entering component, and let's go here and let's now pass in the steps, the animation steps. So here we can actually first style it. So let's first set some styles. So let's set the background to wheat. Okay, so that's a color. So that's a wheat color. Let's save that, and oh, here we actually need to put a comma here, and if we save that and go back to the application, okay, and if we go to the console, here we see that we get this error, right? And it's unable to process the animations due to the following failed trigger transitions, and it's saying that @rootAnim has failed due to query enter returning 0 elements, and we have to use query enter with the optional flag set to true, right? Okay, so if we go back to the code here, and if we go just after the animation steps, we can pass in the options. Okay, so if we go here and set optional to true, okay, so if we save that now and go back to the application, and if we go to the console, hopefully we don't get any errors. That's good. All right, so let's go and try this out. All right, so here we see that we can't actually see the background of the newly inserted component changing. So let's go back here, and the reason for this is actually, if we go here, we can actually see that the component tags, these component elements, have their display CSS property set to inline. If we go here to the computed styles, we see that it is inline, right? And with these animations, they don't usually work when the element is display inline, right? So let's go and change that. Let's go here and let's set display to block. Okay, let's save that and let's go back to the application and let's try this now. And there we go. So now we see that the background is set to wheat on the newly inserted element, and the background of this entire area was still blue because here we are actually still setting the background color of this div here to blue, right? So that's why we see that. But in terms of the entering component, it is being set to these styles here. As we can see here, it is changing to wheat. And if we actually go back to the code here, we can actually put in an animation. So at the moment, we are just setting the style, right? So there's no actual animation. It isn't animating to the end state. So if we go here and animate for 1000, like we did below here, so it's animating to the end state, and it should do a nice fade effect, right? So if we save and go back to the application, and now it's actually fading out, and something interesting happened, right? So we first saw the component have a wheat background, and then it animated to transparent, and then after that we saw the blue background and it then faded into transparency, right? So let's try that again. All right, so we first see this this happening, and then we see this happening, right? And that's because these are animation steps that are executed one after the other, right? So in sequence. So yeah, so that's why we're seeing that, and that's pretty cool. All right. So let's now go back here and let's play around with this a little bit more. Let's now go to the bookmarks tab, and here we see a little bit of an issue, right? So during the animation there is an overflow, and that's not too good. So let's try that again. Here we see that there's this overflow, right? So all throughout the animation, there is an overflow. So to fix this issue, we can actually go back to the animation code. And here, let's go to this style here for the query enter. And we actually have to set height to 100% to make sure that the component doesn't take up more space than its parent's height. Okay, so if we set height 100% here, like that, save that and go back to the application. Okay. And there we go. So there's still an overflow, but let's actually see that once again. Let's go here. All right, so to start off with, it's actually correct, right? There is no overflow on the start of the animation. However, halfway, it then starts to overflow again, right? All right, so let's actually see that again. All right, so let's go here, and let's go back here. All right, so it starts off good, but then halfway through, it actually overflows again. And that's actually because we aren't passing in any styles to the animate function. If we go here, we're actually setting this to animate 1000 with no styles explicitly set there. All right, so we aren't passing in any styles to the animate function here. And that means that Angular is trying to transition to the regular styles of the element, right? So the end styles of this element. And the end styles of this element hasn't got the height 100%, right? So we don't want Angular trying to transition the height property, because it's trying to transition it, and it's resulting in the height being set to auto during the animation, right? And we can see that if we go here and set some styles explicitly, and we just say that we want to set the background to transparent, like that, or we could actually just use the end state styles, and we can do that using the asterisk, right? So using this notation, we are saying that we want Angular to animate to the background styles of the end state, right? Which in this case would be transparent, right? Well, which in this case would be transparent or RGBA with a 0 alpha value, as we saw before. If we look here, if we go to the component tag here, and if we look for the background, if we do show all and background color, we can see that it's transparent using RGBA with a 0 alpha value, okay? So this is the value that we put as the asterisk, because it's just going to be the styles of the end state for the background, right? All right, so if we save this and we go back to the application, we see that fixed the issue. The reason it's fixed the issue is Angular isn't trying to transition the height property anymore, okay? Before, it was trying to transition everything to the end state, and the end state didn't have this height 100%, and we want this height 100% to stay all throughout the animation. So here we had to explicitly set the styles we wanted to animate during the animation, so that Angular wouldn't try and change this, right? And we can see that because here we could set height to auto and save that and see what happens. Okay, so now here we see that we get the same problem. That's because we are now telling Angular to animate to height auto, right? And then that will then create this effect that we don't want, right? Where it overflows. And let's actually set this to the asterisk so that we are sure that this is the value of the end state, and save that and go back to the application, and we see that's what was happening before, right? It was actually setting height to asterisk, and that's why that was happening. All right, cool. So let's get rid of that, and let's do that, and this should now work nicely. Let's go back to the application, and there we go. Cool. All right, so let's now create a simple phage transition where the entering component fades in, right? Cool. All right, so let's go back to our code, and let's actually get rid of all of the animation steps that we've done so far. Let's just... Okay, so let's just go here and let's do that so that we just have this transition with an empty array of animation steps so that we can start fresh. Okay, so let's save that and go back to the application. And now there is no animation at all. Okay, cool. All right, so to create this simple fade animation, we want to, first of all, select the entering component, set the opacity to 0, and then animate it to opacity 1, right? So let's go and do that. So let's go here, and first of all, let's use query to select the entering element. Okay, query enter, and then let's pass in the animation steps. And here, we want to now set the opacity to 0. So let's set the style and opacity to 0. And this can be a string or a number, I think. So I think we could do that, or I think 0 will work as well. So that's fine. And then let's go here, and then we want to animate this to opacity 1, right? So animate with, let's say, 1000 milliseconds, okay? And here we could set explicitly the styles to animate to, but as the end state has full opacity, we can just set this to animate to the end state. And if there's any issues, then we will explicitly set the style, but let's do this for now and let's see how it works, all right? So let's save this now and let's go back to the application and let's see how this works. Okay, so here we see that there's no animation. The reason for that is because we actually have to set display to block, as by default they are display inline. So let's set display to block here, like that, and let's save that and go back to the application. And now we see this fade in. Cool. So if we go here, we now see that it's fading in. However, we do see that we have that overflowing effect, right? So if we go back here, that's okay. But if we go back to bookmarks, we see that there's an overflow, right? All right, so we have this overflowing effect again. So to fix that, we actually have to go back and we have to set height to 100%. Save that. Okay, go back here. All right, so it's starting off good, but then it halfway through, it will then overflow again. If we do this, we can see that happening here. Okay, let's try that again. Yeah, so we have the same problem as before. So to fix it, we can do what we did before, which was to prevent Angular from trying to transition the height, we actually have to explicitly set the styles here. So if we do style, and here, we really just want to animate the opacity to 1, right? So let's set opacity 1, save that, go back to the application, and now let's try that, and it seems to work. That seems pretty good. Let's try this one. Let's try this one. Cool. All right, so that's looking pretty good. One thing I just want to quickly check though is if I go to the console, we see that we have this error, right? And that's because we're using query enter without the optional option set to true. All right, so let's go and quickly fix that. Let's go here and let's go to the end here. So let's go just before the closing bracket for query. Let's set the options and set optional to true. Okay. Let's save that now and go back to the application. Okay, it still works. That's all good. And if we go to the console, we don't have the errors. Cool. All right. Cool. All right. So at the moment, we are just fading in the entering component, and the leaving component is instantly hidden, right? It isn't actually animated at all, right? So this will just instantly disappear, and the entering component will fade in, right? So let's actually transition out the leaving component. Let's go back to our code, and what we have to do is we actually have to query for the leaving component, and then we have to animate it to opacity 0 to fade it out, right? All right, so let's actually go before the query enter, because we actually want to first fade out the leaving component and then fade in the entry component, right? So we first want to go here and do query, and then query for the leaving component, like that. And then here we can pass in the steps, like that. And here we need a comma. And also, let's set the optional option to true as well. So let's go here and set optional to true, okay? All right, so let's go inside here. And here, we don't want to set any styles explicitly to start with. We just want to animate to a style, right? As it's already got full opacity, right? But we just want to animate to opacity 0, right? So animate 1000, and we want to set a style here and set opacity to 0. Okay, so let's save that, and let's go back to the application, and let's go and switch to the component. So here we see that the leaving component isn't actually fading out, and that's because we have to actually set display to block, right? So let's go here and let's set a style, and let's set display to block. Like that. Put a comma here. All right, so let's see if this works. Let's save that, go back to the application. All right, so let's now go to notes, okay? And it is actually working. It did actually fade out. So if we try that again, it is actually fading out. Cool. That is working. However, we do have the issue of the entering component being added straight away, right? So if we go here, we see that the notes component is being added straight away, and all right, so let's see here. Yeah, so let's go and fix this, right? All right, so Angular adds the component of the new root straight away, so it's being shown instantly. And if we see here, so there it's added instantly, and then it actually starts the animation there, right? So what's happening is if we go here, it's actually querying the leaving element, it's animating that, and so it's doing this, and then it's animating the entering one. But Angular has instantly added the component of the new root straight away, right? So it's being added, and then that's when the animation starts there. All right, so So what we can do is we can go back to the code and we can actually query the entering one first, just to set the opacity to 0 so that we can't see it, right? So we could do something like this. We could do query, enter, and then we could pass in the animation steps. And let's not forget the optional true. And here, we can now do style, opacity, 0, like that, right? We could do that. Let's save that and go back to the application. And let's try this now. Okay. All right, so that's a bit better now, right? Because it's actually animating out the leaving component, and we can't see the entering component until this one has completely faded out, right? So let's try that again. Okay, and now we see it. Okay, so that is kind of working, but it's still taking up space in the UI, right? All right, so now we can actually see that the entering component isn't visible, but it's still taking up space in the UI, right? Because here, if we go to the bookmarks tab and click that, we see the scroll bar here, right? And that's because it's still taking up space in the UI, right? So we have this issue where the newly inserted component is still taking up space in the UI and it's affecting the layout, right? We also see this when we go here, for example, and we see that the newly inserted component is starting off here. That's because the leaving component is still actually in the UI. We just can't see it because it has opacity 0, right? But it's still taking up space in the UI. So if we go back here, we see that this is starting off down here and then jumping to this position once the animation has completed, because the leaving component has been removed from the DOM at the end, right? So to fix these layout issues, we can actually use absolute positioning on these components. Yeah, all right, so at the moment, the newly inserted component is being inserted below the current component, the one that's leaving, and the leaving component is still taking up space even after it's faded out and things like that, right? So overall, we just have this layout issue, right? So let's go and fix this issue, and we can fix the layout issue by making the entering and leaving components absolutely positioned so that they are stacked one on top of each other, instead of what we have now, where the newly added component is being put below the current component that's leaving, right? So if we make these position absolute, they'll be stacked one on top of each other. So yeah, if we make these position absolute, then they'll be nicely positioned one on top of each other, okay? So if we go back to the code here, let's go and style the entering and leaving components so that they are position absolute, all right? So as we want to style the entering and leaving components with these position absolute styles, we can actually go and create a new query which targets the entering and leaving components. So query, and then we can type in colon enter, comma, colon leave. Okay, so now this will select the entering and leaving component, and then here we can type in an array of animation metadata. Okay, and let's not forget to put the optional true in the query, optional true, like that, and put a comma here, like that. All right, cool. So here what we can do is we can actually now just style this, right? So we can do a style, and inside here we want to set position absolute, like that, and we want to set top 0 and left 0. Cool. All right, so let's save that now, and let's go back to the application. All right, so there we go. Straight away we saw that it's being positioned absolute, and it's being positioned top 0 and left 0. Now, that isn't exactly what we want. So we put in top 0, left 0 here, and it's now positioning it top 0, left 0 relative to the whole window. We actually want this to be top 0, left 0 relative to the content section, right? This div here. If we go and inspect, and we go to the content section div, here is where we want it to be relative to, right? So let's add position relative to the content section div, and let's see how that works. So let's go back to the code here, and let's go to the template, and we could put a style here and just say position relative like that, and see if that works. So let's save that and go back to the application, and let's reload the page. Cool. All right, so that's a lot better. So it's actually putting it top 0 and left 0 relative to this content section area here, right? So if we try that again, cool. All right. Cool. All right. So now the problem is that it's actually not 100% width. All right. So now we want this to not show all the way to the left, right? So the reason that's happening is because the component hasn't got width 100%, so it isn't spanning this whole width, and that's why it's only spanning the content, which in this case are these cards, right? So it's only spanning the width of its content, right? So these cards here, right? So these to-dos here, and that's why it's actually putting it like that. What we want is, we want this to span the whole width, and let's go and do that now. So let's go back to the code here, and if we go back here, and if we go here and do width 100%, and that's to be a string, and save that and go back to the application, and there we go. So now that's fixed, and it's actually properly fading in and out, and it is correctly positioned. Cool. That's pretty good. Cool. All right, so now it's working. Cool. And as we can see here, it's actually now properly fading in and out, and we haven't got those layout issues that we had before, as they're now positioned absolute on top of each other. Okay. Cool. And one thing I want to quickly mention here is we went to the template and we added the style position relative to the content section div here, and this works perfectly, but I just want to mention that we can actually also do this in the animation transition, right? So if we go here we are querying and we're adding the styles on the entering and leaving components, and we are setting it position absolute, and we want the content section div, right, which is the host component, right? So we want to add position relative to the host component. So what we could do here is we could actually go here, and we could actually just put a style here, right? As all of the styles that are directly inside the transition are going to be applied to the host component, which is the content section, because we have the root anim on this div, right? So if we put in a style here, then you can style the content section div, and we can just say position relative, right? So position relative. Okay, so if we save this now and go back to the application, it's still going to work, and that's because we still have the position relative here. So let's actually try and get rid of this and see if it still works. So let's get rid of that, save that, go back to the application, and let's test this out. And there we go. So now it's actually still working. Cool. All right, so that's pretty good. And if we go here, and we can just quickly test this out by commenting this out and just seeing how it works without position relative here. If we save this and go back to the application, then now we see we have that issue of it being positioned absolutely relative to the whole window, right? So it isn't actually what we want, right? Cool. So I just wanted to show you that to show that we need this, right? We need to either put position relative here or as a CSS style on this div here, right? So we could even go to the class content section and add position relative here as well. So we could do position relative here. That would also work. So yeah, so we could put it here. We could put it as a style on this div here, or we could put it here. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna just get rid of this, and I'm just gonna stick with this way of doing it by putting it there. But you can feel free to use any of the other methods. That's fine. So I'm just gonna save this now. Close this and go here. And yeah, all right, so let's go back here. This is now working. Let's save this. Let's go back to the application. Cool. All right, so the transition between the to-dos and the notes is working pretty nicely. That looks pretty good. Let's now try and go to the bookmarks tab. All right, and straight away we can see that there was a bit of an overflow there, right? If we try that again, we see that there's an overflow on the window. And that's actually because we aren't setting the height at the beginning of the animation. Alright, so let's go back to the code, and yeah, so here we are setting height 100% here. But as soon as the animation starts, it's actually added to the UI, right? So there's a period of time before the leave animation completes where the entering component hasn't got height 100%. So I think if we copy this, if we copy that, and if we put it here, this may fix the problem. If we save that now, go back to the application. Now let's try that. Okay, so I think we may have to also add this to the leave. Let's try that. Go back. Yeah, okay, so now it's working pretty nicely, and it's because we are now setting height to 100% on the entering and leaving elements at all times, right? So it's always height 100%. Now, we are actually putting this height 100% in quite a lot of places, and we need height 100% on the entering and leaving components, so we can just actually move it up here, right? So if I just put height 100% here, then we can actually go down here and remove these from here, like that, and like that. And we're also using display block quite a lot as well. We can actually move that as well. So let's just get rid of this. And get rid of this. We don't need this anymore. And we can now put display block here, right? Display block. Okay, so I think that's it. Oh, here we can actually get rid of this height 100% because we're setting it up here. Okay, so if we get rid of that, okay, save that now, and actually we're also setting the opacity to 0 here and here. So I don't think we need to do that 2 times. I think we can actually get rid of this as well. Let's try that. Save this and go back to the application. Cool. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Awesome. Cool. All right, so yeah, I like that. Let's go back to the code here. And one thing I want to mention is now that we're using position absolute, we may not even need this display block. So let's just try and comment that out and save that and go back to the application. And let's see if it still works. Yeah, so this is still working, it looks like. Cool. All right. So it's fading out and then it's fading in. So the leaving component is fading out and the entering component is fading in. What we can do now is we could try and make this so that the new component fades in as the old component is fading out, right? So they happen at the same time. So if we go back to our code here, we can now use a function from Angular Animations called group to group these animation steps together, right? So if we go down here, we want to group in, so here we want to group these 2 steps together, right? So the leaving animation and the entering animation, these 2 steps here, right? So if we go here and we do group, and we have to actually make sure we import it from Angular/animations. So let's use that one, okay? And here it takes in steps, right? So it takes in the animation steps. So let's put an array in here, and let's now go to these 2 steps here and let's cut them. Let's select those and cut those and then paste them inside the group here. So if we paste that in there, okay, cool. So that's looking pretty good. If we save that now and go back to the application, let's now try this. And there we go. Cool. So now they're actually fading into each other like that. That's pretty cool. Cool. All right. So what we can now do is we can actually maybe try and add some movement to this animation. So maybe if the leaving component moved to the left as the entering component moved in from the right. So maybe we could do that. So let's go back to our code here, and we can actually add some transforms to these animations, right? So here we can add a transform to the leaving component, transform, and then here we can do translate x, because we want to move it on the horizontal axis, so the x-axis, and we want to put in minus 80 pixels, so it moves 80 pixels to the left. Okay, let's try that. Let's save that and let's go back to the application. Okay, there we go. So the leaving element is moving 80 pixels that way, right, to the left. Cool. All right, let's now go back to the code here, and let's move in the entering component by 80 pixels from the right. So it's 80 pixels offset to the right, and then it animates into its normal position, right? So to do that, we actually first have to set the style, right? Because we don't want to transform in here, as this is the styles we are animating to, and we want to animate to its normal position, right? So here we would actually put translate x 0, right? But we want to actually set a style here so that it starts off by being 80 pixels offset. So if we do that, so if we go here and do transform, and then type in here translate x, and then type in 80 pixels, so that it's 80 pixels to the right. And if we now go here, we can actually put transform and then translate x 0, so that it's animating to the normal position. Okay, so if we save this and go back to the application, okay, and if we change the root, cool. All right, so that did work. It was actually moving in the new element 80 pixels at the same time as the leaving element was moving away to the left 80 pixels. So if we try that again, cool. All right. However, we do see this issue where we have this overflow, right? All right, so we get this overflow and we see those scroll bars. So to fix that issue, we can actually go back to the code here, and we can actually go up here to the styles for the host component, and we can set overflow to hidden. We could also go here and set a CSS style on this div or inside the content section class to set overflow to hidden. So for example, style overflow hidden. We could do that. If we save that and go back to the application, then we see that we don't see the scroll bars anymore. So that did work. And we could also just put this inside the styles for the host component here, right? So let's get rid of that style that I put here. So it's just like this. And I'm going to save this and go back to the application, and we'll see that we'll still see the scroll bars. Yep. Okay, so now if we go here, go to the component class and add it here, overflow hidden, save that, go back to the application, and now we don't see those scroll bars. Cool. All right, so that's pretty good. So yeah, so it's now moving away. So yeah, so now the leaving component is moving to the left 80 pixels as the entering component is fading in and moving in from the right 80 pixels. Okay, and yeah, so let's make this a bit more interesting. Let's let's go to the code here, and let's go to these animations here. And one thing I quickly want to do though is I've just noticed that we have this query enter style opacity 0 here. The reason we needed that was because before, when we weren't using group and we were having these happen sequentially, so the leave component was animating out and then the enter animation was happening. When we had that situation, we needed to set the opacity of the entering component to 0 so that it didn't show up as soon as the animation started, right? Because the entering component is added straight away, right? So that's why we needed that. However, now that we're using group and that these animations are happening at the same time straight away, we don't actually need this. So if we actually get rid of this, or just comment it out, I guess. All right, so if we save that and go back to the application, and then try that. All right, so there we go. So we see that the entering component isn't fading in. That's because we actually before we actually removed the opacity style from the enter animation because we had it up here, right? So we now actually have to re-add the style opacity 0 here. Okay, so if we put opacity 0 here, it will now fade it in, right? Because before it was relying on this style here, but we've now commented that out. The reason I'm doing all this is because I want to actually move the all of the styles into one place, right? Before we couldn't do that because we needed to actually straight away set the opacity to 0. So we actually had to separate this style from the animation styles down here because this animation was happening after the leave animation. But now, as they're happening at the same time, we can just move all of the styles and the animation here, right? Okay, so if we save this now and go back to the application and try that, that's much better. Okay, cool. So, all right, so yeah, so let's make this a bit more interesting then. Let's first of all decrease the durations because they're quite long, right? So if we change these to about 200 milliseconds each, okay, so the so now the entire animation will be 200 milliseconds because these happen at the same time, right? So it'll be 200 milliseconds. If we save this and go back to the application and try this, there we go. So that's much faster. Cool. All right. What we can now do is we can actually maybe try and make this a bit more interesting with some easing. So for the leaving component, we can actually ease in. So so that it will start off slow, but then it will start to accelerate, right? So it will accelerate towards the end, right? Okay, so let's do a string here of 200 milliseconds and then ease in, okay? Like that. Let's save that and go back to the application and see how this looks. Cool, all right. So I think that looks okay. Cool, all right. So right now, our root animation will move the leaving component to the left, and it'll shift in the entering component from the right, like this. Okay? And this makes sense for when we are on a tab and we change to another tab that's on the right-hand side of the selected tab, right? So for example, if we go to the to-dos component, okay, so now we are at the to-dos root and the to-dos tab is selected. And if we now click on the notes tab, which is on the right-hand side of the to-dos tab, so then if we click that, then the movement in the animation makes sense, right? But then if we try and move from the Notes tab to the To-Dos tab, that didn't look that right. And I want to actually change the animation so that when we are moving to a tab that's on the left-hand side of the currently selected tab, that the leaving component will move to the right, and the entering component will shift in from the left. Cool. All right, so let's go and implement that now. One way we can achieve this is by assigning some sort of number to each of these tabs so that we know the position of each tab, right? So, for example, the bookmarks tab could have a tab number of 1, and the to-dos tab could have a tab number of 2, and the notes tab could have a tab number of 3, and then we would know which animation to apply depending on if we are increasing that number, so for example 1 to 2, or if we are decreasing, so from 2 to 1, right? So hopefully that makes sense, but it'll be a bit more clearer once we start to actually implement this. So alright, so what we can basically do is we want to, instead of returning the URL here, we actually want to return the tab number, so the number of the currently selected tab, right? And that will still allow us to animate each time the route changes, because each time we change the route using these tabs, the tab number will change, right? But then it will also allow us to access that tab number inside our angular animations, and then we can use them inside our state change expressions for our transitions. So let's go to the routing module, and inside the routing module we can actually specify some data for each route object, right? So for example here we can actually pass in some data. Okay, so let's actually set this to an object, and in here we want to actually set what the tab number is, right? So we could do tab number is 1, and then we could go here and do the same thing for these ones and set this to 2 and set this 1, 2, 3. So we could do that. We could use 0, so we could start at 0, so we could do 0, 1, 2. We could do that. And we could even change this to something else like tab index maybe, or just tab, right? So I'm just going to call this tab, I think. I'm going to call this tab. Okay, so tab 0, 1, 2. And let's do 1, 2, 3. Okay, so let's just do that. But we could start at 0 if we wanted to, but let's do tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. Okay, so let's save that now. And now we can actually go back to the app.component.ts, and inside the prepare route method we can actually access this activated route data. Let's actually change this, and let's, instead of returning the URL, let's return outlook.activated route data. Okay, and here we can actually use square brackets and select what we want, and we want the tab, right? Because this is an object and we want to select the tab property. Okay, so let's return that, and if we save that now and go back to our application, okay, and let's try and change tabs. Cool, so it's still working. So that's pretty good, because it means that it's returning a different value every time we change the route, so it's able to then trigger the animation, right? So that's pretty good. But now we actually can change our transition state change expression string, and we can actually use the tab number. Okay, so inside here, for example, we could say only do this transition from 1 to 2. So if we save this now and go back to the application, and if we go here, then there was no animation, right? We we just went from the notes tab to the bookmarks tab, and there was no animation, and that's because that would be a state change expression of 3 to 1, right? But we said here to only do the transition from 1 to 2. So if we go here, and if we try and change the tab to to-dos, then we have the animation. Cool. So that's pretty good. Let's try and go from to-dos to notes, and there's no animation. Cool. So it's actually only doing the animation from the bookmarks tab to the to-dos tab, because we set the transition state change expression from 1 to 2. Cool. All right, so now we want to actually make this more dynamic, and we actually want to say whenever we are incrementing the number, so for example from 1 to 2 or from 2 to 3, then we want to continue on with the animation that we've set up, right? So it's going, the leaving element is moving to the left, and the entering element is shifting in from the right, right? Okay, so let's go back to the code here, and let's change this, and if we look here, we can actually look here and look at the state change expression parameter description here, And we can see that there's some special values, right? And increment is one of them, right? Okay, and that will mean that the transition will happen when a numeric value has increased in value. Okay, so let's do all right, so let's do increment like that. Let's save that and let's go back to the application and let's try and go from to-dos to notes, and it worked. Cool. Let's now try and go from notes to bookmarks, and there was no animation. Great. That's good, because that would actually be decreasing the value, not increasing the value, because we went from 3 to 1. Okay, let's try and go from bookmarks to to-dos. Cool, that works, and that works. Great. Cool, all right, so let's go back to the code, and let's set up a transition for a decrease in tab value. Cool, all right, so let's actually copy our increment transition first, and then we can adapt it. Okay, so let's go and let's just copy this. So let's go here, and I think this is the end of the transition. If you look at this bracket here, it maps to this. Yep, so it's like that. Okay, all right, so I'm going to just copy this, and then I'm going to put a comma here, because this is inside an array. It's inside this array here. So I'm putting a comma after that, okay? And then I'm going to paste in the transition here, okay? All right, so first of all, let's actually change this from increment to decrement, like that. Okay, so this will execute the transition when the tab value is decreasing, okay? So let's actually just save that like that. And let's go back to the application and let's see if this works. So let's try and go from the Notes tab to the To-Dos tab. Cool, and actually runs the animation. Cool. All right, so let's go back to the code here, and let's just adapt some of these values to make it look a bit better when we're going in that direction. So here we have these values from the increment transition, right? And here we actually animating the leaving component so that it's shifting to the left, right? So if we go to the application, you can see that it's shifting to the left, the leaving component, and the entering component shifts in from the right, okay? So that's what we have here. But we now want to, for the decreasing tab value transition, we want to actually flip this. So we actually want this to be positive 80 pixels in the leaving animation, and we want it to be a negative 80 pixels here, okay? So if we save this and go back to the application, and now let's try this, that's much better. So now, when we're moving to the left, the leaving component is shifting away to the right-hand side, and the entering element is moving in from the left. So if we try that, it does that. Cool. Cool, all right, so that looks a lot better. Cool, all right, so the animation looks pretty good, but I think we can play around with the values of the animation still. So if we go to here, let's play around with the values for the entering component animation. So let's make this a string so that we can make this a little bit more advanced, this animation. So let's do 200 milliseconds, and now we can actually add a slight delay and see if that looks nice. So all right, so let's put a delay here. Let's put 120 milliseconds of delay. Let's save that, and let's go back to the application. And quick thing. Here, I've changed this only on the decrement transition. Let's actually change them in both places, in the increment transition and in the decrementing transition. So let's make sure that they're the same so that it looks good. Otherwise, it might not look too good. So let's just copy this and let's move this up here like that. Okay, let's save that now and let's go back to the application and let's try that. All right, so the reason I did that was so that I guess the user could see the leaving component kind of start to leave, and then they start to see the new component kind of transition in. So that's why I've put that delay. I guess we could maybe play around with the value of the delay, maybe change this to slightly less, maybe 100 or something. Let's make sure we change the value here as well. Save that and try that. Okay, I'm actually also going to add a easing. So I'm actually going to add ease out. And I'm going to actually make sure this is the same up here as well. So I'm going to just paste that in here. Save that, go back to the application. And that looks much nicer. So I think we could pretty much leave it as this, but I think I might play around with it a little bit more. Maybe I can make this slightly longer, maybe 250 milliseconds. And if I go down here, I can make this 250 milliseconds, save that, go back to the application. Cool, all right, so I think that looks pretty good. We could also play around with the translate, and we could actually maybe decrease this value here. So maybe we could change to 50, 50, 50, 50. We can see how that looks if we save that and go back to the application. Okay, so maybe it's a bit more subtle. Okay, I'm probably also going to add a little bit more to the delay. Maybe if I set 120 milliseconds, make sure that this is the same down here. Okay, save that, go back to the application. Yeah, so there's lots of ways to play around with this animation and change it and customize it to how you want it. So feel free to play around with it. But I think that's pretty good for now. I think we can leave it like this. Cool. All right, so I guess the next thing we can do is we can move on to working on the UI for adding a new note.